That's some good lag.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the HACKADAY podcast. I'm Elliot Williams, editor-in-chief of HACKADAY.
And I'm Dan Maloney. I'm a staff writer at HACKADAY.com and community engineer at HACKADAY.io.
This is episode 206. We'll be exploring how busted crypto killed the queen, taking a look at Kicad's new clothes, and peering inside the Sol 20. This week in the news, we've got, drumroll please,
It has absolutely no bearing on anything that we do, but then again, it's the sign of our times. Apparently, catalytic converter thieves went under the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile while it was parked in a Las Vegas hotel parking lot and took the catalytic converter off, leaving the poor Wienermobile sidelined during Super Bowl weekend.
Is nothing sacred.
I don't know how worldwide iconic the Wienermobile is, but it's a big deal to see that thing drive by here. I mean, it's just ridiculous. You know, it's just a whole bunch of corporate nonsense and silliness, but it is iconic. It's a 27-foot long fiberglass hot dog on wheels.
That just says America.
Nothing says America like the Wienermobile.
Exactly.
And someone climbed up underneath the thing and must have been laughing the entire time they sawzalled off the catalytic converter and took off with it. And these Wiener ambassadors, or whatever they call them, Wienermobile crew, discovered it and ended up having to take it to a truck shop in Las Vegas. And they were able to rig up a temporary one, but, you know, here you go. You got all these big old trucks up on lifts and they're doing, you know, serious things, replacing tires and doing, you know, engine jobs and stuff like that. And then a 27-foot fiberglass hot dog rolls into the shop and they put it up.
Must have been a good day for them.
It's good for a laugh, if nothing else.
That's good we got short news this week because we have extra round of What's That Sound?
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
This week it's What's That Sounds? Because last week I mistakenly ran another contest when it was a pick a winner week. So we have two, count them two, pending What's That Sound winners to draw, which means I guess we just got to give away 2 t-shirts. I mean,
okay.
You know, it's the only fair thing to do.
Exactly.
The first one was from way back on February 3rd.
What's that sound? Ooh, very rhythmic.
Yeah, right?
I don't know, man. That could be anything.
It could be. And that was, yeah.
Nah, I got no guess.
That was a really tough one. 3 people got this one right, and that's not super many. It was an escalator, actually.
Really?
And it sounds like it's an escalator that's about to die.
Yeah, in need of maintenance.
I was like trolling around YouTube. I'm like, let's see, we'll just do an escalator. I went looking for some more, and they all sound like that.
Wow.
I think I've never like seriously listened to an escalator before.
Maybe there's just too much background noise in a department store or something like that.
Exactly.
That's got an escalator. You just can't hear the...
And I think that's probably like each of the steps rolling up over the top and turning around and heading back down or something.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense, but...
Anyway, in the I will never be surprised by people again category, there are tons of videos of people just recording the sound of escalators for like 10 hours at a time so that people can go to sleep who like white noise.
Yeah, that would work.
I think it would, actually.
Rhythmic like that
Yeah.
chakunk, that would do me in.
3 people got this right. Of them, Desque, solder fumes, and flux sucking shunt. So you can't make it up. So here goes. I'm gonna roll I've got in front of me an 8-sided die, and I'm just gonna throw away all the high numbers. We'll see how this goes. See how long it takes me to roll a small number. 6, 4, 8. I knew this was gonna happen. 1. Congratulations to Desque. I'll be shooting you an email and get you a t-shirt soon. That's number 1. Now, bonus round. Last week's What's That Sound? Give that one a try. I have high hopes for you on this one.
It's a wave this time. How nice.
You know.
I'm going to disappoint you. That's going to be some pop culture thing that I never got into. I don't know, Doctor Who?
It's not at all pop culture. That's the direction Tom went with it too. He was like, I don't know which video game this is from, but it's like so atmospheric. It has to be from some video game, Siren in the Rain kind of thing.
Yeah.
This one was actually suggested by Christina, and it is the sound of the tornado siren that they use in Chicago.
No way, really?
Apparently this sound like resonates through super tall skyscrapers in Chicago, and it's apparently a super creepy thing.
That is really creepy.
If Borcall is to be believed, and I bet he or she is, it's Federal Signal EOWS 612 on alternate whale setting.
Wow.
And a lot of other people just said alternate whale or Chicago siren or whatever. Now, where you're not totally wrong on the pop culture side, I think this is also the sound of... There's a horror character called Siren Head, and he does this sound too, actually. So we got a couple people who said that it was Siren Head. And I mean, I think that's like true, but I think it was actually the Chicago siren was there first. So I don't know what I'm going to feel about that.
It's a tough one.
Apparently disguises himself as a siren pole and then comes to life and eats people.
Okay.
You couldn't make that up. Except I guess somebody did. What do you think? What's your call? Do we take the siren heads in, or do we?
Yeah. I think
You think we count the siren heads?
I think so. That would make me feel better about it.
Okay, fair enough. Let's do that. Well, that brings our number of correct answers up to basically everybody who responded. Out of 14, 12 people got this right if we count all the siren heads. So good on you. And the rest of you with your Chicago tornado sirens / alternate whales, you're all right too. I'm going to cheese out and I'm going to ask the computer for a random number because otherwise I'd have to go downstairs to get a 12-sided die. Boo.
Can't have that.
And the random number is 4. Congratulations, Mr. Arnaldi. Federal signal modulator siren with alternate whale, famous from cities like Chicago. Congratulations. I'll get an email and a t-shirt out to you too. Whew.
Nice.
That was the most involved What's That Sound ever. Next week, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled program where I pick one sound and give you guys a week to answer what it is. So stay tuned for your chance to win a t-shirt. All right, my first hack this week is kind of hacker news. This is from the Kicad team. Kicad 7.0 is here, brings trove of improvements. I had just gotten my head around Kicad 6, which they released last year, and now all of a sudden, boom, here's Kicad 7. And I think it's really neat that they're kind of stepping up the pace of improvements on Kicad, which is definitely my preferred PCB generation tool these days. A long time ago, I can't even remember, what was it, like 3 years between Kicad 4 and Kicad 5, and then another 3 by 5 to 6, and then here we go all the way up to 7. There's so many different new improvements in this new version that someone's going to like something from all of them, and it probably mostly depends on what kind of stuff you do, what you will think is neat. I mean, there's some really niche features like the ability to put a picture behind your laying out the footprint. So you're tracing out the circuit over the top of a picture, which is superb for people who are doing reverse engineering, right? Like you take a picture of the board you want and you can actually reproduce the traces just straight over the picture just by tracing them out. That's awesome. And that's one of the things where this would only happen in an open source tool because this is one of those crazy little use cases that some people have and they're like, hey, that'd be a cool feature. And they're like, easy enough to put a picture in the background. Let's just do it. And so I think that's really cool. There are a lot of kind of serious power user changes that came out this time, including things that I really enjoy. It's got an automatic complete and an attempt to finish when you're doing board layout. And what those do is both, if you're halfway through a trace and it's kind of obvious where it should end up, you don't actually have to drag it to the pad it goes to. You can just hit automatic complete and it just does it for you. It's kind of like per trace auto router light or something. And then the other feature that's similar is attempt to finish, where you can actually click two parts and say, just auto route these two, and it tries to connect these two parts together. And both of these are really cool because they're not full auto router features. You can suggest enough to the computer that it can then figure out what it has to do to take it the rest of the way. And I really like that. You can clear all the traces off of a given part now. There's just all these kind of, I don't know what. They seem like small features taken independently, but they make it easier for you to work with the computer and for the computer to help you. And I really like that sort of thing. I'm personally not of the use the auto router school, but I'm not the hate the auto router type either. Back when I used Eagle all the time, I would always route things and then hit auto router, see what it does, rip up all the bad ones, hit auto router again, rip up the bad ones, reroute some more, hit the auto router. And I had this great kind of dialogue flow with the auto router where I would be like, fixing up its mistakes, and I really like doing that. And this kind of gets Kicad more in that direction of a kind of not automated but kind of semi-automated layout procedure, and I think that's really cool.
I'm surprised you didn't mention something about the command line interface. I thought that would be something that you especially would grab onto, because that seems like something just like scripter's heaven to put together a tool chain start to finish that has no GUI.
You don't even have to run Kicad to run Kicad.
Exactly. And just, it's nice to see that they're moving along here. Although I will say, it seems like nobody has authoritatively solved the Kicad versus Kicad problem.
Oh no, it's true.
I've heard it both ways from apparently authoritative sources. I don't know what to do, and I'm just going to stick with Kicad, I guess. But
I fear that Kicad is probably the right one, and I definitely say Kicad. So yeah,
it's GIF and GIF. It's somebody's going to get bent out of shape either way. So
well, I use it all the time, and I think I probably say it wrong. That's a horror. Oh yeah, one more thing for power users that's really cool. It lets you drag and drop portions of one schematic and or board layout into another. And something that I've always wanted on Kicad is the ability to just here is a power regulator block. I want to just import that into my thing and not have to worry about laying it out and picking the footprints and doing all that stuff ever again. And this is kind of a step in that direction. You can cut paste the regulator block out of a previous circuit and into this one. You still have to do a bunch of dragging around. It's not as simple as just include power regulator, which is what I'd like it to be. But yeah. And the one thing that I can't even believe that Arya didn't mention this in her write-up, the one thing that has been, generating more memes than anything else is that now you can use custom fonts in Kicad, which means you can load in absurd things like Comic Sans for your board layout notations, or wingdings, or whatever else. You can also do reverse text, so you can have black text, white silkscreen. They've implemented text boxes. I think graphics have become easier to import into the silkscreen layer too, which I think is cool because we have a lot of people out there who are not just worried about making their board work, but making it look good too. And giving them the ability to use something other than a Hershey font to write things down with on the board, instructions to people, and then simultaneously making it editable text so they don't have to just take a picture of the text they want and put it on there, is a tremendous usability issue. So for people who want to make things look good or want to document their boards better on the boards themselves, the Kicad folks have got your back here.
Alrighty, my first pick this week is Sol20 Integrated Computer Teardown. You may not have heard of the Sol20. It's certainly not a mainstream machine, but I'm going to call it my first dream machine. I saw this probably in a Popular Electronics or something like that, advertisement in the middle of Popular Electronics. And something about it just struck me. It was gorgeous. It was this blue steel case with these walnut slabs at the sides, and it had this sort of logo at the front. And I don't know what it was about the fact that there was a logo on it. It felt like it was a machine that was a product. Like every other machine before that was, blinky lights and switches and all that stuff. And that's cool. There's no denying that. But this one looked like it was a product for the first time. And I was very excited by this. It was no way I could afford such a thing. But there it was sitting on the pages of the magazine, and, time comes and time goes, and we all move on. Action Retro found one of these antiques from, I think the copyright date on the one of the PC boards was like 1976. Opened it up and gave us a tour. And, the number of design elements that you see inside this thing that kind of still resonate today is pretty amazing. It's got the motherboard arrangement. It's got its own power supply, which almost kind of looks like, it would be like an ATX power supply, form factor anyways. I mean, it's got a big transformer and huge capacitors, so it's a linear power supply, and it probably weighs a ton compared to, what an ATX power supply is. But still, the idea of, power supply over here, motherboard over here, riser card for the S100 bus, which, is totally different from ISA or anything like that. But I was like 12 years old when this thing came out. I remember being struck at the time by the concept of a bus. And I don't know why. It's just one thing that stuck in my head about this computer and the advertisements and such from back in the day when it was new that described how the bus worked. And something about that concept really kind of resonated with me. This was a machine that was way more affordable than most of the machines that were on the market at the time. And this is 1976, $2,100. That was with a monitor. So that was actually pretty affordable, even though it's the equivalent of like $6,300 today. At the time, that was actually pretty affordable. Of course, it could also buy you a car, possibly even a new one from a dealership.
That's the price of a Honda Civic
in 1976. Yeah, exactly. So there was very little chance I was going to be talking my parents into buying me one of these things. But the idea that you got a complete computer in a box, the only thing that was extra was the monitor, and they even sold that to you, was really cool because you didn't have to go out and get a keyboard or a terminal, monitor, this, that, and the other thing. I always thought this was a really beautiful machine, and it was really nice to see the interior of this. It seems like it is in great shape for a almost 50-year-old machine. I was surprised by that. It seemed like more like a machine that was going to need some TLC, but the only thing that really fell apart was the foam and foil keys for the keyboard, and those just turned into a disgusting mess. The little foam plugs with the Mylar on one side. Interestingly, and perhaps not surprisingly anymore, someone actually makes those foam plugs for these kind of keyboards. So he just bought a bag full of the thing and glued them back into the keycap, and he was on his way, and the keyboard worked fine. It was a nice retro teardown and a good little trip down memory lane from a memory I don't have actually working on it, just wanting it. Now, the other thing that Al pointed out here with this article was that we recently saw a reproduction of the Sol 20, which I wrote about because I saw that and I was like, ooh, Sol 20, I have to write about that. Mike Gardy built a reproduction machine that duplicates the look of it as much as possible. And I believe he used a Raspberry Pi and an emulator inside because I think it's a CPM machine. It's a good-looking machine that had really bad timing because like a year later, the Apple One came out, and I think in 1978, I think the TRS-80 came out, and there was just no way you're going to win against that. So not too many of these things were made, and it was just nice to see inside one of them from the original stock.
My next hack is an open hardware Eurorack compatible audio FPGA front end from Sebastian Holzapfel. And this just tickles all of my funny bones. It is an FPGA project, it is a synthesizer project, it's an audio project, and it's got a lot of clever, awesome details in it all at once. I really think this might be interesting as a first step for somebody wanting to experiment with coding on FPGAs, partly because he's done all of the hard work for you, which is designing this board, which has a 4x4 analog to digital converter and digital to analog converter that speaks I2S to the FPGA. So basically, and he's even written Verilog code for you to initialize this thing and get it running. So basically, you bring your FPGA to the party, and that's easy because he's got a PMOD connector for this thing. You plug it in there and run his initialization code, and then you've got 4 audio ins, 4 audio outs, all of that digitized and ready to go. All you have to do is provide the mathematical manipulations of the samples in the middle. And I think that's just really, really cool. Again, I'm torn whether this is a synthesizer part or whether this is an FPGA learning tool or both all at once. Is this going to be an introduction to synthesizers for some people? Maybe also. If you don't want to get into the hardware side of things, there's an awesome modular synthesizer simulation called VCV Rack, and he's also written a VCV Rack plugin for it for this thing that simulates that. So you can plug it up to other simulated modules, all of this from the comfort of your own computer. And to top it all off, he has it compile the Verilog you would be running on the FPGA in there into C, run that in this VCV Rack module, and you can play around with it. So this means if you want to experiment with this without the hardware, maybe you don't have a modular synthesizer set up, you can do that. Maybe you're just dipping your toes into synthesizers at all and you want to play around with VCV Rack and then see if you can add some custom effects to it using his stuff. You can do that. Or if you've already got some gear and you want to take it out and show your friends without having to lug a computer around, you could build this thing. He's got it all for you. And I think he's going to make a limited production run too. So go check out his GitHub. So if you want the physical side of this too, you can either make it yourself or pick one up from him. A superb project where it is just so easy looking to get into it that it's extraordinarily tempting to do so.
It's one of these things that can do so many things that I don't know what it's supposed to be able to, or it's what its main concentration is.
I mean, it's a really, really cool project because it is so open-ended. But you're also right. He's giving you a Swiss Army knife. You have to want to cut things or open corks out of bottles or, whatever the heck you do with a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, bottom line, I don't know what it is, but I know I like it.
Oh, yeah, and this was a talk at FOSDEM. It's a nice video. He's explaining it all to you. You should absolutely go check that out, too.
Okay, next up for me is how to roll your own custom object detection neural network. This focuses on VisiCam, which is a Raspberry Pi based general purpose machine vision camera that's been making the rounds lately with us. We did Donald Papp, who also wrote this article, did a bit on the VisiCam, which looks like a lot of fun and kind of cheap and easy. It's like I said, it's Pi based. And sticking a camera out on the front of it, and then GPIO, and you've got all the Pi stuff, but then you've got this AI camera guts that everything you expect from a machine vision system these days. What's interesting about this current article to me is the custom part of the object detection. Most CNNs that kind of come pre-canned already have an idea of what objects are. So if you pointed at a cow, it'll say cow. If you pointed at a person, it'll say person. If you pointed at a flat hand, it won't, however, say paper, as in rock, paper, scissors. But everybody knows a flat hand is paper and a bald hand is rock, and what scissors look like. That particular model has been trained, and that was used an example in this, and what you can do with this. And I found that very interesting because every kind of use case that I have for machine vision and cameras like this always kind of deviate from the, normal out of the box things like, this is a traffic light, this is a cow, whatever. I have an application where it would be important to see, for me to have a camera up to see if someone's coming up toward my outdoor office, my shack, because I can't see. I'm not facing the windows, and it makes me a little paranoid. It would be really nice to have a little Raspberry Pi monitor kind of set up here where I can see who's coming. And it would be also really nice if it told me that, it's someone from my family, because it can recognize my wife or my daughter or my son or whatever, rather than, here come the cops or something like that. And now I need to use the escape hatch or something. I'm kidding. I don't have an escape hatch.
Which of these happens more often? Yeah.
Well, this kind of toolkit would make that a whole lot easier to implement. I also had an idea for a driveway monitor for my friend. I probably have mentioned this before. He lives out in the middle of the woods, and he's always got people driving up and down his driveway by accident. It would be nice for him to be able to recognize that's Dan. He's just driving up to visit, or that's unknown vehicle. I have no idea who that is. It might be a good idea to pay attention to this, or if it's UPS or the mail or whatever. So doing that kind of stuff seems like it would be a lot easier to do with this system than it currently is with anything else. From what I understand, the basic workflow is to identify a whole bunch of images of what you want to train, items of interest. Those get sent off to Google Colab, which then actually generates the neural net. And then you can download that model and check it out, see how it performs. I don't know if Donald has actually given this further exercise. I know he did a lot with the VisiCam when it first came out, and he put it through its paces. I don't know if he's actually done a lot with doing the custom training, but I'd be interested to see where this goes and whether this camera ends up being kind of the, going back to the Swiss Army knife model of machine vision.
Yeah, and the rock, paper, scissors example is just so good in this one because it's kind of a small number of things to discriminate among, which means you can probably get enough pictures to train it reliably because you're only trying to tell between, hand like this, hand like this, hand like this. They still do mention in their article that they have some trouble with scissors, like especially differentiating between scissors and rock, because if you think about it, your hand's kind of balled up in either one. Mm-hmm. It's just one of them you're sticking your fingers out. But if you stick your fingers out at the camera, that could be a little bit ambiguous for the machine. Whereas if you do it sideways to the camera, it looks like a totally different object to it. And I think that's really neat. Moreover, I think that the idea of training it yourself, like you said, is just so much more flexible if you've got something in mind that you want to do with it. And, it's not a solution that's already programmed for. So this does add a lot more kind of utility to this thing. I talked with Donald about it when it came out, and I was kind of a little skeptical. I said, look, this is really a Raspberry Pi and a camera in a nice box. And he was like, yeah, but it's also a lot of software integration, and they're kind of holding your hand through most of this procedure so that you can get things done really quickly and not have to worry about digging deep into the woods to try to, build up the model. Could you do all the same sort of stuff with off-the-shelf tools? Absolutely, I think you could. If you're doing 100 of these, that's probably worth doing. On the other hand, if you're just going to screw around with it once to play rock, paper, scissors, or figure out who's coming up your driveway, it might make sense to buy the pre-streamlined setup like this camera.
With the caveat, too, that this is based on a Raspberry Pi 4, I think, so who knows if you can actually buy this thing right now? Or, did they have a big stock of them and they can put them in their case or what? I don't know.
Yikes.
Yeah, you never know, right? But yeah, I think that's the value added part here is that it's holding your hand while you get through the tedious parts of building that tool chain and get on to the interesting part of machine vision. It would be useful for me. So thanks to Don for writing this article.
My last hack today is 5-axis printer wants to design itself. I'm going to be slightly critical here, a slightly hyperbolic claim, made by Rick Real, who is running this project. On the other hand, it is a darn sweet looking 3D printer and a 5-axis 3D printer to boot. Part of what's interesting here, at least to Rick who designed it, is that he designed this machine using the kind of optimized generative design stuff that Autodesk's Fusion 360 can do these days. So basically you say, I want to put a rod here and I want to put a rod here and I'm expecting them to have this force on it. What's kind of the optimal geometry of part between them? And so you end up with this like totally futuristic looking 3D printer here. And I think that's kind of cool, but I'm not sure it's not just a gimmick. One thing in particular with these generative 3D prints is that they're not designed for manufacturability. They're not designed for 3D printability. And so I'm looking at these and they're just like overhangs everywhere and more support structure than you can possibly imagine. That said, the outcome is these really sweet, lightweight, sinuous looking parts. So you gotta love that. But all of this is still kind of bearing the lead, which as far as I'm concerned, is a 5-axis 3D printer. And that is so cool. I think we've seen in the last couple years a real resurgence in interest in non-planar 3D printing. Like normal 3D printers, they just go layer, 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 layer. And that's dumb because this machine can move in 3 dimensions, right? It can go up and down and make hills and waves and stuff. Add 2 more axes onto this thing in the form of kind of a gimbal mechanism that lets you tilt the object you're printing one way and then tilt it the other way on the moving bed. And that means you can effectively print at angles, not just top down, but you can get the nozzle oriented at an angle to your piece. This means no overhangs anymore because anything that would be an overhang, you just turn the piece over and print it onto it, right? 5D 3D printing is really neat and it solves the problem that ironically this very printer has, which is how would you print these crazy sinuous shapes with a regular printer? Well, you'd have to use so many supports, it'd drive you crazy. But if you had already a 5D printer, boom, you just spit them right out. And I think that's really cool. A bunch of people come up in the comments and they say you need also a 5-axis slicer software that takes advantage of these extra degrees of freedom. And that's absolutely true. And that's kind of the cutting edge right now, I think, in terms of open source software, but any slicer software at all. .x has a 5-axis slicer that gets linked in this article. You should check that out if you're interested in this. And if you'd like a simpler machine, Freddie Hong has made one that actually Rick here references as his inspiration, the Open 5X, that's also a 5-axis machine. The question is, are we going to build the hardware first and then work on the slicer software? Or are we going to wait for the slicer software and then build the hardware? My take from the early days of RepRap is that we built the hardware first and we worried about the slicer second. And there were some hacky, rough and ready slicers back in the day. Whew, you kids today have it so nice. And you kids today, this is your chance to shine because this is where the frontier is right now. It's, more than 3 axes, 4-axis, 5-axis slicing. There's a ton of kind of non-planar 3D printing stuff being done with normal 3D printers. This just adds an extra level of complexity onto that. And when the software catches up with the capabilities of these machines, we're going to be in a much cooler place than we are today.
Yeah, I agree with you that the generatively designed aspects of this are kind of the B story at best. It's the 5-axis thing. And I've always sort of wondered about most 3D printers really are at best 2.5-axis.
Yeah.
That Z-axis just goes up a little bit, every time, and it seems horribly underused. And I wondered about that for a long time. Like, well, why don't we use that Z-axis more? It seems like you could really do some interesting things with it. And here you go. Generatively designed parts of this that allow that are very cool looking and kind of neat. But the fact that they allow this 5-axis printing scheme is much, much cooler story to me. I really am surprised, though, that there's no movement on a open source 5-axis slicer.
Yeah, there is some, right? There's .x and there's XYZ DIMMs, actually. I think of them as being more into kind of normal 3D printing, non-planar stuff, but they actually have some extra funny rotating head designs and stuff. So, there's work on the slicers out there. And yeah, I do think that's where the frontier is right now. That's going to be the future pretty damn soon. Give this thing a look if you're at all interested in the cutting edge of open source RepRap 3D printing. You'll think it's pretty cool too.
Last up for me is a complete departure from the usual kind of fare, but still a little bit in our wheelhouse. Deciphering Queen of Scots Mary Stuart's Lost Letters by Maya Posh. What gets me about this is not so much the fact that this is a historical documents that are being analyzed and bring into light, details of the Elizabethan times and all that, although that's really interesting. To me, what's really cool here is how far back tradecraft and espionage and all of the slimy things that we do today, how far back all of this goes in human history. And the 1600s, that's not the beginning of this at all. This kind of tradecraft and cryptography, not cryptocurrency.
Real crypto.
Important tools of statecraft go back thousands of years. Basically, as long as there's been some weasel listening behind the curtains or around the corner, ready to go back to report to somebody else what he heard, there's been tradecraft. And this is just an example of how far tradecraft had gotten by the time of the Stuarts and the Elizabethan period in England. Basically, what this is a trove of letters that were written to and from Mary Stuart, the Queen of Scots, in the 16th century, while she was basically trying to get her claim to the English throne acknowledged. And that wasn't sitting very well with, I think it was her sister, right? Queen Elizabeth I, I think, was her sister. Everything you do in that sort of Game of Thrones, quote unquote, environment is at the risk of your life. I mean, there's no dynamic range in punishment in the 1600s. It's either you don't have any problem or you don't have a head anymore. Everything you do is extremely high risk or the possibility of high reward. So you have to make sure that you are securing your communications. And this code that Mary Stuart and her supporters came up with to send correspondence back and forth was broken at the time, apparently, which actually became key to further breaking this extra trove of letters that was discovered. But they had a mole in the French embassy, I think, who delivered plain text copies of the letters at the time. So we have kind of contemporaneous examples of what was actually written, and that helps obviously to decode the cipher. But not all of them were similarly coded. So you've got these cryptic characters, a group of handwritten, bizarrely formed characters that you have to figure out what they stand for. Some of them stand for individual letters, so there's a simple substitution cipher. Some of them stand for names, phrases, locations. There's the extra kind of complicating factor that there's characters that direct the person who's deciphering it to repeat the last character. There's also characters that are thrown in occasionally that tell you to delete the last character. There's a bunch of nulls that get put in. And this is all like standard crypto stuff, but the complicating factor here is that there was no way to just like take these documents and OCR them. Each individual character in these documents had to be traced out by hand in custom software, a GUI software that you basically use a stylus or a mouse to kind of trace out the character, put that into this cryptanalysis program. In doing all of this work, they finally managed to decode 57 letters and found a lot about what was going on with Mary, Queen of Scots, and the Queen of England, and how that all happened. Now, of course, this doesn't end well for the Queen of Scots. She actually managed to implicate herself in an assassination plot. She mentioned something about dispatching the current queen. She responded to that letter, like saying basically, yeah, that's a good idea. We should do that. Since the Queen's spy master, Walsingham, had the copies of this and knew how to decipher them, then he had the evidence he needed, and off came her head. So again, high stakes. And
this whole time I'm sitting here going, these things, I remember these letters. I remember something about letters and Mary, Queen of Scots. I found the link for you, folks. It is X-ray defeats letter locking, unfolds and reads letters sealed since 1697. Some of these letters were not just encrypted, they were also folded together with this elaborate letter locking kind of stitching of the letter and then sealing with a seal that made it kind of tamper proof. And what's interesting is, of course, restorators, preservationists don't want to just rip this thing open to have a look at it. And so David Mills and some other people put these into essentially CT scanners and kind of digitally unfolded the folded up letters without actually undoing the letter locking, which is really, really cool. This is back in March of 2021. You should go check that one out as well. Now you've opened the letter. It's encrypted. Good luck. Now get to work. But yeah, it's really cool to see these kind of old school. Some of it's the same as things today. I guess today we're a lot more sophisticated. Although, if you didn't know who Squiggly was and you never had the code book, you'd never figure out who Squiggly was except by context. And so, like today, it gets defeated by having a mole who, sneaks the actual text out. Boo.
Or, if you have fewer qualms about torture, you might,
right?
you
That's
might
true
just
too.
find someone who is willing to tell you.
There's an XKCD for that in the show notes. My first quick hack this week is OpenSpice, a portable Python circuit simulator, and this is work from Roman Parise and Georgios Detorakis. This is a Spice circuit simulator written entirely in Python, so it'll run on any computer that you can get Python on. It parses all of the normal netlists. If that comes out of Kicad or anything else, it doesn't matter here. Most of the other spices are, of course, free, but not all open source. This one is both and runs on any machine you got, so that's pretty cool. Next up, Citizen Science finds prehistoric burial mounds. This is a project coming out of Zooniverse, which is really cool. It's a science aggregator where they give you data and say, you at home, do the analysis for us. Here they had a bunch of LiDAR maps of the Netherlands and asked people to help them find the ancient burial mounds from kind of 2000, 3000 BC. They found a whole bunch of them, and they actually went and visited 300 of the sites that amateur archaeologists found, and 80 of them were brand new, and there are probably 1,000 more. So this is really cool. But if you haven't looked at Zooniverse yet, you absolutely should. It's just got a ton of crazy open data sets, and if you want to spend some time looking for asteroids or ancient burial sites, it's the place for you, telling one loon from another. And last up, Parametric Press unravels the JPEG format. Parametric Press is a neat, brand new digital magazine. You should check it out. They have a bunch of other kind of brainy topics. This one by Omar Shehata is dissecting the JPEG image format, and it goes into everything that makes it work, the kind of luminance decomposition, the sine cosine transforms, etc. What's cool about this is that it is all interactive, and you can tweak both the hex values of the image itself, or you can set them all to zeros, or you can move sliders around that play around with the subsampling sizes and stuff. If you want a deep understanding of the JPEG image format, this kind of interactive hands-on approach is just superb and makes me want to read more. So I'm going to be keeping my eyes peeled on parametric press.
Okay, first up for me, goniometer gives you the edge at knife sharpening. Felix Imler apparently really likes well-sharpened knives, and more so, he likes to know exactly how well-sharpened they are. A goniometer is a tool for doing that. Basically, it's a tool for measuring angles. And what he does is builds, I think it's 3 different versions of this, which are basically just a scale that tell you the angle of light reflected from the sharpened edge of a blade. It's a simple tool. It's not going to actually help you sharpen the knife if you can't hold a 15-degree angle very well, like me, but it's going to tell you how bad you are at sharpening. It's still an interesting tool. It might be the only way to get a good idea of exactly how sharp your edges are. Next up, how homemade robot arms used to be made. Mariusz Staszek here goes way back into the junk bin and pulls out a robot arm from 2003 that really looks like something from 2003. This is the way we used to have to do this. Again, you kids don't know how easy you have it when you can just order your brushless DC motors and 3D print up a bunch of harmonic drives and things like that. For the most part here, Mariusz looked like he used a bunch of old cassette players and the gears and motors therefrom to make his robot arm move. There's FR4 in a structural roll. There's cassette pinch rollers for fingertips. He's even got a bunch of homebrew opto-isolators on board this thing, relays to control it, and it all plugged into a parallel port of a computer. It's just kind of an example of what you had to go through to make electromechanical goodies back in the day. And last up, IEEE Spectrum came up with RCA's clear plastic TV that wowed crowds in 1939. 1939 is not really a date we associate with TVs. We think more of the golden age of TV in the early 50s and post-war sort of era. But TV was around in the late 30s. These were the early adopters that had to be convinced that such a thing as a TV was a good thing to spend a couple of $1,000 equivalent and put that in your living room. And to kind of give people a little bit of eye candy, RCA made one of their cabinet TVs out of acrylic. It's absolutely gorgeous. You can see exactly what the wood cabinet would be like, except that they executed it all in acrylic. These were stand-up TVs, so the picture tube was mounted horizontally, so it didn't take up a lot of space in the room, and then you open the lid on it, and there was a mirror there, and you could watch TV on your tiny little CRT. I'm not sure that it really sold the public. $600 for such a TV at the time was probably a little bit out of the ballpark for most people, but it was, like I said, the early adopters, and they're the ones who needed to come on board, and that's what this thing was aimed at.
And that brings us to our can't miss articles. These are long pieces written by our fantastic HACKADAY writing staff. And this week I'm picking Arya Voranova's All About USB Talking Low Level PD, and that's USB power delivery. How many articles is this in the series now?
I've lost track. It's got to be 7, 8, something like that.
I think it's more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 articles so far on USB-C, and I've enjoyed every last one of them. People who have also enjoyed it, I hate to tell you this, the next one is going to be the last one for a while, but Arya is going out with a bang, and this is something that I've kind of, as a kind of low-level embedded hacker myself, kind of wanted to see since the beginning. One of the crazy things about USB-C is that it's not just power, it's not just data, it's all negotiated, and especially if you're going to use the alternate power modes, so not 5 volts, but like 12 volts or high power. The chip that's requesting the power needs to talk with a chip in the device that's providing the power. And this article gets deep into the weeds on that transaction. If you're the kind of person who likes to open up the data sheet and look at all those wiggly line diagrams where it's like this, you set this byte now and you set this bit here, this is for you. Arya builds a USB PD trigger board basically all by herself out of a FUSB 302 transceiver chip. I can't tell if that's cheating or not yet. This chip takes care of the whole like physical aspects of the connection, and then you just talk I2C with it with your microcontroller and tell it what to say down the wire. I guess that's not cheating at all, actually. That's probably the smart way to design a power delivery board if you're going to do one yourself. So this is just the beginning. Next article is going to take this a little bit further and diagram out the whole conversation between the device and that's receiving the power and the device that's sending it. But this one already it kind of grounded me, like seeing how the actual handshaking goes. And, now you send a binary 8 and you send a binary 2 back, and this means okay. This sort of thing where it actually gets to how the transaction works at its lowest level, like what signals go down the wire, is something that always makes me feel like I understand the protocol. And so I'm stoked to be at this level. I don't know that I need to go dig inside that chip and get down to the phi, actually. I'm probably happy here and looking forward to the next one.
You look at a USB-C connector and you think, okay, great, whatever, plug it in and my phone gets power, or plug it in and I can talk to device over here, whatever. You don't think there's that much going on. There's enough for 10 articles on how it works, and 11 eventually, I guess. But here we are,
Yeah, and there's this ongoing thread in the comment section, especially when Arya talks about power, where the barrel jack proponents come out and they're like, this shouldn't be anywhere near pins with data. Just give me a barrel jack and put 12 volts on that. There's, that's foolproof. And first of all, yeah, I kind of will admit that it may actually almost be foolproof, but do you know whether there's going to be 9 volts coming down that barrel jack or 12 volts? Do you know if it's positive tip or negative tip? Because I have 2 synthesizers over there that both take barrel jacks, and one is positive tip and the other's negative tip. And I have labeled those cables within an inch of their life because this is one of those where you plug it in wrong and everything's fried. This does not happen with USB-C because the device has to talk to the thing that's sending the power and has to say, okay, you can send me 12 volts. There's some degree here where I'm totally in Arya's camp, and Arya's an unabashed proponent of USB-C, although she sees the ugly bits too. And I think that what she's starting to do here is give you a roadmap for how, with a very minimal outlay, you can put this kind of power into your own project. The total expense of building the circuit that she's got in this example here is picking up one of these FUSB 302 chips and then picking up a USB-C connector part. And that's it. The rest is like couple caps, couple resistors, nothing. And so if you've already got a microcontroller in your project, you can build your project around this, and then whoever's using it doesn't have to have a custom power supply for it, as long as they've got a USB-C power supply that supports this standard. So I do see this as being really useful for hackers in the future. Arya's kind of doing a little pioneering work for us here, also with the open source PineSil that she kind of cribs this implementation from. And others in the open source hardware community are kind of doing us all a favor, because we're only going to have one power adapter in the future. And won't that be a good life? Of course it will.
Okay, my pick this week is probably not to the surprise of Elliot at all. I'm going to guess methane pyrolysis, producing green hydrogen without carbon emissions. This is by Maya Posh. And the reason I joke about that is because this is the kind of article that I like to write about these, big chemistry projects. I've got a whole series of big chemistry posts, stories about how we put things together and take them apart and do all the chemistry necessary to run a modern life. This one, however, is a bit of a departure because it's talking about basically how to take methane apart and use it not to produce energy directly, but to store the energy that's within the methane in the form of hydrogen. There's 4 hydrogen atoms inside each methane molecule. If we can break those apart and capture the hydrogen, then you've got hydrogen, and that's a store of energy as well that can be burned. And when it's burned, it produces nothing but water, actually. Now, is it much of a trick getting the hydrogen off of the methane? No, it's not. It's actually pretty easy. It's called steam methane reforming. It's done constantly as an industrial process right now. And basically what it is taking a bunch of methane gas, so natural gas, surprising no one that natural gas is the feedstock for this, because it seems to be the feedstock for everything. And that's kind of the central theme of my big chemistry post, is that natural gas is like literally at the beginning of almost every process that produces some kind of chemical endpoint. But steam methane reforming takes the methane, heats it up, and decomposes it into hydrogen. But then the carbon that's freed up from each methane molecule reacts with the H2O in the steam, the water in the steam, and forms carbon dioxide. So then you've got the 2 problems. You're using methane, which is a fossil fuel of limited supply, and then you're releasing CO2, which is a greenhouse gas. Wouldn't it be nice if there were a way to do that without releasing CO2? Well, there is, and it's a promising technology that might actually help with the transition away from fossil fuels, although, well, we'll get into that. The process of pyrolysis, you're all familiar with pyrolysis. Anybody who's burnt a piece of toast has pyrolyzed bread. Pyrolysis is just the breaking down with heat. So it's not a whole lot different than steam methane reforming, because you're breaking down methane with heat. But in pyrolysis, instead of a relatively low heat of 900 C or so, you're using much, much higher temperatures, up to almost 2000 C. And you're thermally decomposing the bonds between carbon and hydrogen in the methane directly and releasing the hydrogen, but without the carbon at the middle of the methane going on to form carbon dioxide. It just basically drops out and is elemental carbon. I strongly suspect that hydrogen is going to be part of a non-carbon, non-fossil fuel energy economy. You're gonna need it somewhere along the way. It's going to be important for things like heavy trucks that can run on fuel cells. It's going to be important for jet transport, airplanes. It might be important there. It might be important for localized small power plants based on fuel cell technology. We're still taking our hydrogen completely from methane here. So we're using a fossil fuel, and that's maybe not so good. But at least with methane pyrolysis for hydrogen production, we're getting the hydrogen out without releasing CO2 into the atmosphere. And basically the carbon that comes out of it can be sequestered, buried in a coal mine or something like that.
A lot of people come up and mention this in the comments. They're like, this isn't green because they're using fossil fuel-based methane. And that's correct. This isn't green. And in fact, there's a whole color spectrum of different ways to make hydrogen out there, where green is the one that's split from water, and blue, I think, is the one that comes from a fossil source but doesn't emit CO2 in its production or use. And then there's like gray and black, where you just like pull it straight out of the oil. And this is, I think, blue, although I'm looking at it now and they're saying, there's someone else on Wikipedia, they're now classifying the methane pyrolysis hydrogen as turquoise.
Turquoise, yeah, that was it.
Which must
Blue
be
green.
in between. It's in between blue and green, right? Because it's certainly better than the SMRs and trying to then capture the carbon dioxide afterwards, because you just don't make the CO2 in the first place. So I like that too. Apropos the color scheme, some people in the comments do suggest that this is kind of just a fig leaf for big industry, that they're trying to keep making hydrogen the old way out of their scrap methane. And, it's cheap, it's economical. And I think that is also probably true. I think you don't have to be even too cynical to say that. Of course, they're trying to make use of their methane. But it's, I guess, only a good thing if they're trying to figure out ways to do it that don't release yet more CO2. So, glass half full, glass half empty. It's definitely not full glass, but, at least they're doing something.
And as Maya points out, there are other uses for hydrogen. It's not just for, fuel cells so we can power planes and trains and automobiles. We need a lot of hydrogen to make ammonia, and we really need ammonia. I covered that before, the Haber-Bosch process. Super, super dirty environmentally. And by making some cleaner hydrogen, I think we'd all benefit from that. It's not the be-all, end-all answer to everything, but, come up with something that makes things a little better and just keep doing that. That's kind of how we work.
That wraps it up for this week's HACKADAY podcast. Thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to leave comments or follow the links, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. And if you see anything cool or do anything cool, email us tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
keep on hacking.
This is episode 206. Will be, if you've got any, if you'd like to follow the
clear things out.
The coughing. It's beautiful.
A different kind of hacking. Ha ha ha.
Where was I going with that?
Next up, homemade one more time. I'll start over again. You got through it.